This is the Fantasy Football Unlimited podcast with your host, Kevin Murray.
Welcome to the Fantasy Football Unlimited podcast. On this episode, we have an incredible guest. He is one of the hardest working individuals in sports media. He eats, sleeps, and breathes football. He's an ESPN NFL insider, co-host of the Fantasy Focus Football podcast, host of the First Draft podcast with Kiper and Todd McShay. You see him on SportsCenter and making guest appearances all over the sports media landscape. He is always prepared and has his finger on the pulse on everything and anything that when it comes to the NFL. He is ESPN's Field Yates. Welcome to the podcast, Field.
Thank you for having me on. It's good to catch up with you. It's been a little bit of time. We've talked in various different forums and settings, but I'm glad to be on the show now.
Look at us, Field. Look at us.
Look at us. That's right. Love to get the Paul Rudd gif and going right now. Let's go.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, obviously the tables have turned. Once upon a time, I believe it was November of 2016. I was guest on a fantasy football podcast for the very first time. Just recently named Commissioner of the Week, and my reward was to be interviewed by Field Yates on the Fantasy Focus podcast. And then obviously that led to incredible memories. And that I remember it vividly. I had a wall of scripts and ideas just based on, whatever questions Field asked, I was going to be ready. So vivid memories of that. And that led to being a part of the Commissioner of the Year. Commissioner of the Well, yes. So the
Commissioner of the Year.
Exactly. So I was on live with Field Yates on the Commissioner of the Year announcement show. I had a bunch of balloons and confetti booby trapped above me in case I got that call, and sure enough, the rest is history. What do you remember of that?
Well, what I remember is this is a testament to you, and I'm going to use it to sort of describe part of what I love about fantasy football is that fantasy football, and I use this word often, but I'll use it again here. Fantasy football is community. Whether it's people, and you can play with anybody. You can play with, if you play in a 10-person league, you can play with 9 strangers you meet on the internet when you enter the draft room on ESPN.com. Or like many people, you could play with coworkers or high school friends or college friends or friends from your neighborhood. You can play with your wife. You can play with your kids. You can play with whoever it might be. That is what's beautiful about fantasy football, is that every fall for 18 weeks, I get to reconnect with various circles of my life. It's not that I don't talk to my high school friends during the off season or my college friends during the off season, but during the season, we have a very natural hook for 18 straight weeks. It's fantasy football. It's smack talking our matchups. It's discussing trades. It's making fun of somebody who accidentally benched Patrick Mahomes, whatever it might be. And the only way that those leagues exist is with commissioners. And I think that your dedication to being not just a commissioner, but to being an exceptional commissioner was unparalleled. You have a sincere dedication to your league, that the people that are playing with you in a league are really being privileged to do so. I've been a commissioner before in a lot of leagues. I try my best to not be the commissioner now in leagues. But when I have, I can tell you that if this is the threshold, and for those that are listening and not watching, I'm drawing an arbitrary line with my hand. There were times in which I just went slightly above the threshold line, and yet you have gone. I mean, you are like. Have you seen that picture recently of the F1 driver and Kristaps Porzingis, the NBA player, 7'3" versus a 5'3" individual? You were the metaphorical Kristaps Porzingis of commissioners. I was the metaphorical F1 driver, doing just enough, but not nearly to the level that you were doing it. And you were handsomely and deservedly rewarded for your dedication to being a great commissioner. It was a cool moment for sure.
I appreciate all of those words, Field. I love the game of fantasy, and I love celebrating the game of fantasy. So bringing more fun and joy to fantasy leagues is definitely something I put a lot of passion into. And now, obviously,
can you correct me if I'm wrong here? You have children, right?
I have a daughter. Yep, she's now 10.
Okay, at 10. So I was going to say, at the time, I remember thinking to myself, okay, old enough where you weren't still changing diapers at the time, where your disposable time was enough that you could make all this happen, right? I feel like I'm in the throes of it right now. I've got a
Yeah.
daughter, and then I've got another one coming maybe during this podcast. It's very soon. Whereas like my disposable time right now is usually dedicated towards like sleeping or doing something I haven't done much of, like go to a gym. I don't know, catch up on TV shows. I know that there's going to be a time when I get back to the other side of this, when my children are old enough where it's, in the morning, I don't have to wake up with them and feed them breakfast. They're feeding themselves Eggo waffles or something, and they can get themselves dressed and they can brush their own teeth in the morning. And at that point, I might rededicate myself to being an A+ commissioner.
It's not easy, but you have to be creative with your time. And so during those years where I was just going crazy for my league, I had a green screen set up in the garage, and I definitely did a lot of overnight night work to get the job done. But it's all for the love of the game. So I just want to thank you. Your impact on me, my friend that came with me to Bristol was incredible. Like you're as authentic as it gets behind the scenes, in front of the camera. You are absolutely incredible. And the way that you hosted us and took us under your wings there, and the way that you treated us when we met up at the NFFC in Fort Worth, Texas, it was something, an impression that I will never forget. So very grateful for you. Obviously
I appreciate you saying that. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that experience inspired me to just want to get more involved in the fantasy community. So, your impact has had a huge, impression on me, and I thank you very, very, very much. So,
last question, and then we'll get to it.
Sure.
Do you still have the red jacket? The red jacket still exists somewhere?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it comes out, it comes out during our drafts. It comes out. I've brought it around town. I think it's reached, Canton, Ohio, with the Fantasy Football Expo. It might. I think it's gonna. Well, you're kind of busy during that time. So
no. Clay always gets out there, though. I'm jealous of Mike.
Yeah, it's a special event. So, and I think that jacket might be getting out there this August. So
nice, love it.
So yeah. So again, thank you so much, and congratulations to everything that you've achieved. Professionally, personally. Married to Chapin, now a girl dad. Absolutely love to see that. When we were at the NFFC in the National Fantasy Football Convention in Dallas or Fort Worth that year, we got to meet Chapin, and she was fantastic. So we've always huge fans of Field Yates out here in the Pacific Northwest. Our league, big champion of you, and we love seeing everything you're doing.
It's awesome to hear. I really appreciate that. And that Fort Worth trip was fun in a lot of ways, except for the fact that it was about 118 degrees.
Yeah, for sure. Now, but speaking of your journey, where did it all begin? What are your first memories of football as a kid? When did you fall in love with the game?
Yeah, I remember it being a very young age, and I'm from Massachusetts. So my early memories of the local team, the Patriots, were not exactly a bunch of wins. I mean, the children that have grown up in the New England area for the past 22 years don't know the same Patriots that I knew when I was in elementary school. Remember, I think about the first player that I kind of, I would say I sort of associate with the Patriots is during my life is Drew Bledsoe. Drew had a really solid career, obviously, until injuries befell him in New England, and we all know what happened from there with Tom Brady. But he was the first overall pick in the draft, and I'm sure many people recall that, especially those who might have Pacific Northwest ties. It's Drew went to Washington State, Wazoo, so he is still a big Pacific Northwest guy. I think he might have a spot either in Northern California, Idaho. So he's a big skier now. Anyways, I mentioned that only because the way you get the first overall pick is you are bad. So the Patriots in my very, very young years were not a very good team. But, you still are going to be supportive of your local team. And then my mother is from Columbus, Ohio. So actually my first love for football was the college game. And Ohio State football is a way of life. If you're from Columbus, you're born into it. It's kind of all you ever know. That's how you spend your Saturdays in the fall is you either go to the game locally or you watch the game on TV. So I was a Buckeye nut growing up, as they called it. I had all the recruiting magazines sent to me every single year. I was reading about prospective 5 stars from, various corners of Ohio, or maybe they went out of state and snagged a kid from Pennsylvania, Florida, or California, wherever it might be. But I knew from a young age that football was going to play a pretty integral role of my life. It didn't take long for me to realize that role wouldn't be playing professional football, but I still wanted to play the game for a long time, and I was fortunate to do so up until through college, I should say, during my 2 inglorious years at Division III Wesleyan University.
Same school as Bill Belichick, right?
He's just slightly more notable. It's funny. Our college has a very distinguished list of alumni, but the heavy hitters at the very top are like very heavy hitters. We're talking Bill Belichick, Lin-Manuel Miranda, Michael Bay, the director of basically every cool movie. So it's like, I think if you went to the notable alumni list on Wikipedia, it might have to have a special category reserved for people that like could be famous locally, could be famous on the North Pole. And then you have like, that sort of next tier of people that fills in the gaps that are certainly notable in particular ways, but not to just about everybody on the universe.
No, that's impressive list for sure. And you also played lacrosse, is that right?
Yeah, I not very well, but I talk about it now. Probably it bothered me when I was in college that I wasn't a better player. Now I look back and realize that, well, that wasn't the case. The experience was still worthwhile, even to be largely a reserve player, because many of my very best friends in the world were teammates of mine in college, and I've maintained great bonds with so many of them to this day. And I truly believe, and this is not to say that if you don't play sports, you can't learn a lot of these same lessons, but so many of the things that I learned in my life came through being an athlete on a team specifically. And that means camaraderie, understanding of selflessness, humility, sacrifice, the idea that the journey is just as important as the result in a lot of cases. And I never, ever, ever deter anybody from playing as many team sports as possible.
Yeah, that's great advice for sure. So then what led you to work for the Patriots and the Chiefs in their scouting and coaching departments?
Yeah, probably that I thought that I was going to be a head coach. Actually, I tell people this the story, and it's the truth. I thought I was going to take over for Bill Belichick as the Patriots when I grew up. So, fortunately for Patriots fans, that wasn't the case because they've got 6 Super Bowls, and he's the greatest coach of all time. And fortunately for me, I didn't pursue that path because he's still going and seemingly not ready to retire anytime soon. So, I thought that would be my path, and I had a really unique opportunity when I was about 15 years old, knew someone who knew someone who knew someone type of thing, where I got to go and ball boy for a Patriots rookie mini camp. We're actually about a month past when most rookie mini camps took place. But if you recall, about a month ago, where all these teams had their rookies in and they were running around in t-shirts and shorts, and there was a bunch of hype because they were the new draft class. I was running around as a ball boy and making a fool of myself. That led me to kind of have an opportunity to go back for more. And so I spent basically every day of the summer and then every day that I was home from school down to the Patriots facility and sort of learning the ins and outs of scouting and coaching. And I told people it was my football Rosetta Stone. It was my way to learn the language of football speak. And that turned into an opportunity after I graduated from college to go work for the Chiefs, initially in the operations department, which is sort of like the logistics coordinators. If we're going to a visiting city, who's coordinating the hotel and the flight accommodations, and if a player gets signed as a free agent and he needs a ride from the airport, who's taking him and who's getting him situated at the hotel, things of that nature. So that turned into a scouting role fairly expeditiously, which was great. And I had a couple years there when I was in Kansas City and thought that maybe this was the right thing for me. I always tell people that I would love to say that my path pivoted from football in that capacity to a different capacity because I had this epiphany, and it was I wanted to work for ESPN. But the truth is I didn't. Really, the epiphany was no epiphany. I was about 23, 24 years old, and by no stretch far into my career, but it was already starting to mount this pressure that I remember I'd missed a couple weddings, missed my high school reunion, the first 5-year reunion for high school. There were friends of mine, as a New England guy who went to college in Connecticut, not all, but a good number of my friends ended up settling in Boston, New York, DC, probably no dissimilar to, a bunch of UW kids who probably end up in Seattle or San Francisco. And if you're the stray that winds up in, Orlando, you feel like you're in a different world. And that's kind of where I found myself, was feeling like I was in a bit of a different world from everybody else. And sorry, my dog just entered the fray here.
That's okay.
And so, yeah, that was kind of the reasoning behind it. Was I was concerned, and I don't know if it was fair or not, but I thought maybe, am I going to miss out on all these things that my friends are enjoying together? Am I going to have FOMO for my entire life? And I ended up coming home to get my real estate license, home being Massachusetts still at that point, which was a complete disaster. And that that sort of made the decision for me that, you know what, it's not going to be real estate. I need to have some sports in my life, but was there a way to kind of thread the needle, which was still having football or sports be kind of the driving force in my life, but maintaining some of the balance that I think I also coveted, that I wasn't totally sure that scouting would afford me.
Well, that's incredible. I didn't know that's how you ended up there. So then you basically, it wasn't a difficult decision. It was a decision to move to a different area where you could still celebrate sports, but also be away from the grind of what you envisioned yourself doing.
Yeah, it's an incredible path. Like, I have so many friends who I worked with or I got to know in the scouting community, and it's an amazing job in a lot of ways. Like, I missed the competition, right? Like, I tell people that I am undefeated since I left the NFL, right? I've never lost. On the other hand, I've also never won a game since I left the NFL, right? Like, I go 0-0 every week. So, my second season in Kansas City, after going 5-11 the first year, excuse me, 4-12 the first year, we turn around, have this 11-5 year. You're a football junkie, so you may remember it. Matt Castle was a Pro Bowl quarterback that year. Incredible
Yeah.
season with Charlie Weiss as the offensive coordinator. Romeo Crennel as the defensive coordinator. Win the division. One of the great stories in the NFL. Kind of the plucky underdogs of the Kansas City Chiefs. And that year was magical. I mean, the feeling on Sundays, after a game, if you win, was unparalleled. And it was really a great experience for me. I got in. There was so every year, not every year, but most years, teams are bringing aboard a couple of youngsters who are making their NFL debut, so to speak, on the coaching or scouting side. And this is not a comprehensive list, but we had a little bit of a bigger class because of the fact that there was a new scouting staff and a new coaching staff as well. But some of the people that were hired that first summer that I was in Kansas City. So I shared an office with Ryan Poles, who's now the Bears general manager, and Mike Borgonzi, who's now the Chiefs assistant general manager. On the coaching staff, we had the late Adam Zimmer, rest in peace to him, who was helping out with our linebacker room and who ended up becoming the Vikings co-defensive coordinator and gone far too soon. And then on the offensive side, our quality control coach was a guy named Nick Sirianni, who, of course, you're very familiar with now as the Eagles head coach. So it's been awesome to see so many of the guys that are part of that group that have just done amazing things. And just a few months after we got hired, it was another wave of guys, including Brant Tillis, who oversees the Chiefs salary cap now, does a wonderful job. He's interviewed for the Panthers GM job, probably will end up being a higher level executive than where he's at now. And Ryan Nutt, who's a head of college scouting for the Chiefs. So this group of people and he's done an amazing job contributing to 2 Super Bowl championships. So it's been really cool to see a lot of people that I worked with at a young age that have had a chance to really blossom in the professional football field.
That's amazing. So that behind the scenes experience must have given you a better appreciation for the game and help you understand the language of football a little differently.
Yeah, I'd say that, like, I don't know that you'll ever know it all completely, right? But I think one thing that working on a team side does for you is beyond like learning more about like coverages and blocking schemes and route patterns and things like that is, I think the human side of sports is probably the most, I'm not sure if the word is underappreciated, but maybe under-discussed part of our analysis is, like, so often we're talking about things. I'll dive into the NBA here for a second. I know you're a football guy, and this is probably a show dominated by football viewers, but I'll use it because it's been pertinent and fresh. is I'm from Boston area as well. And like, the Celtics just had this run to game 7. They're within one game of making the NBA finals. And the rhetoric during the series and even after was, should they fire their head coach? And it's like, it may be that one day Joe Mazzulla, their head coach, proves to not be the right person to guide this franchise going forward. It might be, right? And maybe there are people that feel like it was time already. I don't know the answer. I don't really claim to have any opinion on it. But what I will say is that, like, the guy just went through an absolute roller coaster ride of a season. And I think if there was like there's a human side to it, right? Like, this guy just, blood, sweat, and tears for 9 months. And it's like, let's just fire him, like, so on the football side, when we're talking about, trade this guy, sign that guy, cut that guy, I get it. There is a lot of transactional nature to the sport. And by the way, nothing is more fun than free agency in the draft when these moves are taking place. But the human side of it should not be overlooked, that there are still people who are responsible for making these decisions. And there's somebody else on the other side of those decisions. And I feel like even in a brief period of time, I think I grew an appreciation for just how much of that human side is integral to what GMs and coaches are doing on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. That's really cool. So fast forward, we've been at ESPN for what, 10 plus years? Since what, 2011 or so?
Yeah, it's almost, I guess it's one of those where it's like you have to sort of decide like what is like the official start date of ESPN. So the first event that I ever worked was the 2012 NFL draft. So 11 plus years now. But that was in a small capacity, basically an assistant to an assistant for Mike Reese of ESPNBoston.com that year, helping him transcribe some stuff. But I would consider 2013 kind of when my career at ESPN. No, I'd say fall of 2012, because I was doing a lot of Patriots coverage at that point. And then 2013, I moved from Patriots specific coverage to a more national view. So yeah, I would say like 2012, 2013. So about a decade, maybe, give or take a year now. And it's been an awesome ride. And, I kind of pinch myself thinking about it still, but there's an old saying that I'm sure many have repeated. But if it doesn't feel like work, it's probably a good thing. And that's where I'm at a decade later. It doesn't feel like work.
That's awesome. So what do you love most about your positions at ESPN?
I would say is more than anything is that, like I mentioned earlier, my love for football is that, like, I get to live, eat, sleep, breathe, analyze, discuss football and what I would do anyways, right? Like, if I were a lawyer, or if I were a chiropractor, or if I were, selling smoothies in a joint down the street from here, I'd probably still be thinking about football. And people always ask, what's the prep like? And I say, the prep is every day during a show, you got to do various things. You got to, the producers are doing an amazing job of developing content topics and things of that nature. But, like, I'm not saying I don't prep. I absolutely do prep. But I would say that maybe the most integral part of my prep is not like, all right, 2 hours before the show, let me write down what I'm going to talk about in here and there and there and there and there. It's more, all right, so we're talking about Joe Burrow and the chance for a fourth-year breakout this year. All right, let's do this. No. I know Joe Burrow. I know a lot about his game. I know a lot about how things have gone so far. I follow his career closely. That to me is like the prep is just like the perpetual sort of hamster wheel that I'm on consuming football content. So I would say that what I love about it most is just the fact that, if I run into a friend or a local, someone who I live near, or you meet someone at the golf course or wherever it might be, some sort of public setting, and we start talking about football for a few minutes, and then you get I would say fairly calm, hey, I'm really sorry. I'm sure the last thing you want to talk about is work right now. That's really not how I view it. I'm sure there are people who have like a very valuable separation of church and state between like what they do at work and what they do when they're not at work, because there are people that work in very heavy emotional fields, right? I mean, I'm sure being a teacher, it's exhausting in a lot of ways. When you get home, you may not want to dive into like, the decorum of your children that day or the topic you had to address. But for football, I don't feel that way, which I feel very fortunate about. So I'd say my favorite part is the fact that like I get to live my passion on a day-to-day basis.
It's great. It's great. So, what is it like hosting the First Draft podcast with Mel Kiper and Todd McShay? I absolutely love the podcast. It's my
Yeah.
favorite, draft prep, podcast. And those two guys, such incredible personalities. What's it like hosting that?
I say this, and it's not hyperbole. And I'm not saying this because you asked it. There's nobody at ESPN who is as passionate about their specific job as Mel and Todd are about their specific jobs. And I'll break them down individually because I think talking about them together is not a disservice, but I think there's even more to the story. Todd McShay has this fiery passion for being as intimately involved with the draft as possible. And for him, it's not just evaluation of the players, because if you listen to him for 5 seconds, you hear him and his knowledge of these players. He could tell you not just about the 10th overall pick, Darnell Wright, and his film from freshman to junior year at Tennessee. Todd McShay, it could be day 3 of the NFL draft, and some linebacker from, Washington State, not even Washington State, Washington State Junior College who gets drafted. No one's even heard of him. And Todd McShay could rip off, 8 minutes on the guy. Loved his footwork and, great press coverage, corner, whatever it might be, right? But he loves the grind, too, of figuring out, all right, what are these GMs hearing? What am I hearing? What does it mean that I'm hearing similar or dissimilar things to them? And I also respect so much about Todd is that, like, he walked into a dynamic where there was an established guy, right? Mel was the guy. And Todd has found this way to poke the bear with Mel. He does it frequently, but do it in a way that is so clearly not disrespectful, but also really good for television.
It's wonderful.
They're entertainment. Yeah, they're like microwavable entertainment, right?
Mm.
You just turn them on, and next thing you know, it's funny, it's insightful, it's thoughtful. Mel is probably he is the definition of the NFL draft, right? I mean, the NFL draft today does not exist without Mel Kiper's passion and vision about 40 years ago to start covering it the way that he did. And Mel is as sweet of a human as you will ever meet in your entire life. Mel will be sitting there 25 minutes before the show begins, parked in front of his camera. And if you come to the set and you're there a few minutes early as well, Mel will not ask you about the show. He won't tell you, hey, tee me up here on this. He will instead say, how's your wife, Field? How are your kids? What's new with you guys? You guys going to travel at all this summer? You thinking about, who are your, have you guys been following the baseball season at all? Whatever it might be. And I was talking about how Todd has this amazing ability to kind of like prod Mel, but also do so respectfully. Mel's humility is absolutely incredible. Mel was the guy. He still is the guy. It could have been easy for Mel when Todd McShay was on his rise up at ESPN to swat Todd away like a fly and say, I got this, guys. We don't need this guy. I'm the guy. Instead, there's been no bigger advocate for Todd McShay at ESPN than Mel Kiper Jr. Nobody has worked harder on behalf of Todd McShay than Mel Kiper Jr. I think Todd would tell you exactly that. The same goes for some of our newer draft analysts. I mean, Matt Miller made his debut on day 3 of the NFL draft this year at ESPN. And the reason that took place was because Mel fought for him and said, I want Mel on I want Matt on the draft show. So in a world and definitely a media culture where there is just a mounting sense of insecurity, and I get it. We are all human. And I would say that there is, it's much easier for us today because of all the vehicles we have available through social media to either come across as or act independently and selfishly. Mel Kiper Jr. is a teammate. It is a teammate at his core, and him and Todd are the best. That show, I tell people all the time, I'm not trying to be self-deprecating. I'm not trying to be humble. I'm being sincere. It's like I am just there to get them in and out of conversations. Very much besides that. The boat is basically between two beakers, and my job is to make sure it doesn't go that way or that way. and we just stay right where we're supposed to go on course.
It's an outstanding piece of content for sure. So, how much have you enjoyed your experience with Fantasy Focus podcast over the years? It's been an incredible
changed my career.
run.
Yeah, it changed my career, and I think that first of all, it's the people, right? And Matthew, Stefania, Daniel, Mike, the entire crew of people behind the scenes as well. I could do an entire episode on each of those people individually, by the way, but. We were talking about just a moment ago, like how Mel kind of allowed people to be welcomed into his world, right? And Matthew, Stefania, and Daniel at the beginning, and Mike since, like they allowed me to become a part of their world as well with the Fantasy Focus. They didn't have to accept me. They didn't have to welcome me, and they did exactly that. And they've allowed me to. We're not playing characters, right? We are real people, and we are ourselves. But I would say that like character development is almost like a thing that takes place in podcasts, right? Like, I don't know if without the Fantasy Focus, the world knows as much about me as maybe some people do, right? They don't know that I'm a soon to be father of two, or that I've, when I got on that show, I was a 26-year-old, 27, 28. Math is not my strong suit, apparently. Whatever age I was, single guy, right? And that I since became, I started dating someone, got engaged, got married, started a family, right? Like, it's been really important to allow yourself to have your personal life, if you choose, right? You don't have to, but like, it can be valuable in the world that we are in today, because I really think that, and I'll tangent for a second, then get back to Fantasy Focus, is that in the fantasy football space, if there are other content creators who are out there who are watching this and like, maybe looking for a bit of inspiration, is that I really don't believe, and maybe I'm totally wrong here, so this is just one person's opinion, right? I do believe that it's important to have like very unique information to work, to be prepared, to have thoughtful reasons behind your arguments. But I would say that like a lot of the fantasy football content that we are discussing is not dissimilar from a lot of what everybody else is discussing. Right? Like, I don't think you're going to have too many podcasts or too many digital shows this year. They're going to be sitting there saying, guys, here is the reason why Tyler Boyd should be the number one receiver taken in your fantasy draft this year, right? Most of them are going to be, let's talk about Justin Jefferson, maybe Cooper Kupp, maybe Jamar Chase, maybe Tyreek Hill, or Devontae Adams, or Stephon Diggs, right? But the point is that a lot of our stuff leads back to the same thing. And if in week one of the NFL season, it turns out that Jerome Ford actually plays more snaps than Nick Chubb for the Browns at running back, we're probably all going to talk about it. So the point is that, like, I think the way that you get people to come back for more and more and more is not necessarily because you're throwing these flaming hot takes out there that are different from everybody else. It's that your takes are probably fairly similar to a lot of other people, but you do so in a way that's relatable, and that people are compelled to hear more about your story. They like the personality of Dr. Kevin J. Murray. So they want to come back, hear more, because it's familiarity, it's comfort. I think about podcasting and digital shows and the way that I consume them. And a lot of my favorite people that I listen to, I started listening to them because I was looking for a great basketball podcast or a great economics podcast or whatever it might be. And it turns out that, like, if those people decide one day to spend 4 minutes talking about something unrelated to basketball or the economy, I might be okay with it. If they just got the new iPhone and they think it's the greatest thing since sliced bread and they want to talk about the 3 cool things they learned, fine. If they want to talk about how Live Golf and PGA Tour just rejoined forces and how crazy that is, I'm also fine with it. And so I think that's what I think successful sort of content is these days, is developing a familiarity and a comfort zone with your audience that I think will resonate in a way that allows you to spread your wings beyond like your most normal topic. I'll go back to Fantasy Focus now just to round it out, is that like when I was starting at ESPN, I talked about how, it came from the scouting world, but a lot of it was like, let's talk scouting, let's talk football X's and O's. And I had some people that were really smart. Seth Markman is a huge part of this. He's my boss at ESPN, and I give him a lot of credit for this, saying, Field, I think that you might hear fantasy football and you might think of your background and you might think like, oh, like, these are two paths that are intersecting, but do they really matter? Instead, you got to look at it as like two parallel tracks, right? If you discuss why Jamar Chase is the best route runner in the NFL, if you break that down from a scouting perspective, or if you break news that, hey, the Buffalo Bills are trading for Stephon Diggs from the Minnesota Vikings a few years ago, obviously there's a big talk. There's a conversation about both of those things, right? But it's like, just apply that to fantasy football. When you're doing, all right, Stephon Diggs goes to Josh Allen. At the time, Josh Allen was a little bit less proven than he is now. Like, what does this mean for Josh Allen? Does he have the chance to blow up and become, the best quarterback in fantasy football this year? Jamar Chase, best route runner in the NFL. Does that mean that he is, quarterback proof? Does that mean that he is wide receiver one? Does that mean that, the Bengals should actually trade T. Higgins and just let Jamar Chase have 250 targets a year? What does it mean? And I think the fantasy focus really opened my eyes to just how much football and fantasy football are interchangeable. And people always ask, what do you want to do 10 years from now, 5 years from now? My real answer is I have no idea. But my answer that I give when I am compelled to is basically, I want to be where the people care. And as is a testament to your podcast and to so many others out there, people care about football. And they care about fantasy football specifically. Thursday night football is going to beef up their schedule. We've got flex scheduling to avoid some of those games. But everybody was sitting there staring at the possibility of the Rams and Saints this upcoming year in like week 14 of Thursday night football. Who's going to be watching that? Maybe not a bunch of people that don't care about fantasy football. But if you're the person out there who's got Jawan Johnson as your tight end, or if you're the person out there that thinks that, Cooper Kupp is going to have the same season he's had the past 2 years, it's Thursday night and you're saying to yourself, I might have a 30-point lead by the time the game is over in my fantasy matchup. Who cares whether the game is ugly or not? I just want 12 catches for 127 yards and a touchdown from Cooper Kupp, and I'm good.
It's awesome. It's awesome. Now, obviously, fantasy, it brings everyone together. It brings eyes. It's such a special thing. And to me, that foundation of the fantasy experience is the league experience. And so for you, when did you first discover fantasy football? When did you first start playing?
I'm trying to think about the specific date. But I know it was around like 11 or 12 years old, because I remember being old enough that I was like accessing a computer on my own. And my first experience playing fantasy football was actually on the Sporting News website. This is a throwback, but you might recall it actually back in the day. And it's kind of like, it's weirdly like it's almost like an intersection of daily and weekly fantasy and season-long fantasy football, just like way ahead of its time. But you used to get $50,000 and you just set a lineup every week. So I guess it really was daily fantasy. But it was different then than it is now in so many ways, right? Like now daily fantasy is – how much daily fantasy do you play? You play a lot or no?
I'm in Washington State, so I don't play any.
Okay. All right. So daily fantasy is a good call. Daily fantasy to me, I think that the people who are playing daily fantasy are it's almost like playing poker, right? Like it has an element of luck, obviously, right? Like the cards are going to be dealt how they're dealt. But there's so much skill involved still, right? There's so much. I mean, some of these people that are winning big daily fantasy tournaments are setting, 5,000 lineups, and that's, they're maximizing their exposure, right? Whereas I'm sitting there thinking like, well, if I maybe, if I throw Zay Jones in there for a little bit of money, that'll help me win my lottery ticket. I play some, but not nearly as much DFS as I think other people in the industry, which is fine. But yeah, that was my initial exposure, was a lot of Sporting News, and then it kind of just developed from there. My oldest league, I believe, is like 12 or 13 years old now. It's with I went to Wesleyan, as we talked about earlier, small college here in Connecticut. One of my best friends, Russ, has a brother who went to Williams, which is one of our rivals. And so each of them, they are the co-commissioners, and there are 6 players from each college. And it makes for, obviously, whoever, if it's 2 Wesleyan guys in the finals, it's still competitive. But in many ways, you're rooting just to see one of your schoolmates win as much as you are you winning yourself.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, it's funny. My first experience playing fantasy was 1995. I played a Sporting News Fantasy Challenge. Yeah, that was my first time playing too.
Yeah.
Yep. So,
Good old Sporting News. Still around.
Yeah, there it is. So, what's your most memorable fantasy football home league experience?
I always point back to the same one. I was playing in a fantasy football league with some family members. Actually, my brother's father-in-law, so his wife's dad, great guy, Larry, who very into fantasy football, and he asked if we wanted to start a family league that year. And I said, sure, let's do it. I'm in. And we had, I think we ended up getting to 10 people. Definitely had the very typical experience in the sense that maybe 7 or 8 were pretty into it. A couple of them were not so into it, but still willing to play. And so we were playing in a 6-point passing touchdown league, which is important. In the finals, the last game of the finals, I was down by 35 points going into Monday Night Football with Dez Bryant and Zeke Elliott, both pretty much at the peak of their powers. And I needed a dominant game from both of them. In this game, Dez Bryant and Zeke combined for 3 or 4 touchdowns, including Dez throwing a touchdown pass. So getting the 6 points that he would have gotten just 4 points for in most leagues that I played. So Dez gets 6 points for a passing touchdown. I end up winning by 0.08 points, and I'm euphoric. I beat Joao, he's my brother's brother-in-law, so I'm not sure exactly what that makes him to me, but I would consider him my brother-in-law. I win by a narrow margin. He's, obviously disappointed. I'm elated. A few days later, Derek Carr, who was one of our quarterbacks, this is during the best season of Derek Carr's career, where he was excellent, either lost or gained passing yardage, and the stat adjustment, whoever had him, all of a sudden went from winner to loser, right? And so you lose a championship on a stat adjustment, no big deal. It happens. It doesn't happen all the time, but it does happen, right? Meanwhile, I was so pissed off that I lost that I just pouted about it. Didn't say, I just, to myself. We meet up. The next time I saw Joao, who wasn't living near me at the time, I didn't see him again until Easter of that year. So we're all hanging out in a family lunch or something. And I go to Joao. I'm like, dude, I am still so mad about the fantasy championship. And he's like, you won. I'm like, no, I didn't. You won. He's like, no, you won. Don't you remember all those touchdowns from Zeke and Dez? I'm like, did you not check for the stat corrections a few days later? He's like, stat correction? What are you talking about? A few days later, the stat correction took place. He had absolutely no idea the stat correction had taken place. 3 months later, he finds out he won the league. And of course, I have to relive the pain and agony of losing this stupid league that had $0 on the line. And by the way, it was so informal that at no point did our commissioner have a wrap-up email being like, hey, this is how it all went down. Field gets second, Joao gets first, scoring change. That leads to stat correction, leads to a scoring change. Ha ha ha. Let's yuck it up. So Joao got the last laugh there, and I am still disappointed by the fact that stat correction cost me a title.
Unbelievable. That's a great story. Great story. Yeah, to me, that's amazing. And that's what it's all about. The fantasy experience league, the league, the trash talk and all of that stuff. I love it. I love it. So in regards to, in your opinion, what are some of the best ways to maximize engagement in a league?
All right. So let me start here. A good commissioner obviously really helps, right? I think it's important to be mindful about the best way to generate talk, though. Are you a texting group? Are you an email group? Do you use the league platform on ESPN now? You can talk smack to each other. This probably will be controversial, but I actually believe that commissioners should have the right to veto trades. And I've got a lot of colleagues that are very adamant against that. And I am not. I think there should be some checks and balances in place. And the reason why I think it's important is that it leads to the possibility of legitimate trades, and there's nothing that spices up a league like a juicy trade. And I'm not talking about when I give you $1 and you give me 25 cents back, right? I'm talking about when, holy crap, he just traded his Justin Jefferson for my Austin Eckler, and that actually helps both of them, right? Like, I've got good running back depth and you've got good receiver depth or whatever it is. And I think that when you have a commissioner that has some ability to ignore and veto terrible trades, it disincentivizes those bad trades from even being discussed in the first place. And I have found that a terrible trade can lead to so much frustration and agony and disinterest that it actually has the opposite impact of what we are talking about right now, like more engagement. So maybe like some sort of system that's in place, right? Like a commissioner who is considered like balanced and even, who has a keen enough fantasy eye to be like, all right, there is no world whatsoever where like you should be trading Kendre Miller and you should be receiving Devontae Adams, right? Like that's just not how it works in this game, right?
Yeah.
Like, let's talk about this. And I just think that good trades have such a positive impact on the league. Bad trades have such a negative impact on the league. And I know that friends of mine who play fantasy football and feel differently about it, they will point to the fact that, like, you shouldn't have, should not have commissioner veto power. And I'm like, I think that you're giving a little bit too much credit to people to assume that everybody is as invested as you are, right? And like, if you're playing in a league with like 10 other people who make their living giving fantasy football advice, yeah, generally speaking, there's not going to be that many terrible trades. There can be, but there's probably not going to be. But like, if you're playing with a bunch of buddies and like one of them like doesn't even know that the Rams moved to Los Angeles, still thinks they play in St. Louis, like there might be a bad trade that comes through the cracks every once in a while, slides through the cracks. So I think that's a way to keep engagement up is just make sure that like we can get some trades going and that they actually have the right impact of what you're looking for.
Great advice. Great advice. Now, what are some of your favorite ways you've seen fantasy league draft order determined?
Good one. Mostly using randomizer. I would say like I haven't experienced too many that are like particularly unique and notable. So I'm going to flip the question on you. I feel like this will be something that will be right in your wheelhouse. Do you have cool ways that you've enjoyed?
Well, good question. I actually currently going through 100 different ways to determine draft order
Wow.
on social media platforms and everything. So every day I'm dropping a new idea. And so right
What's
now,
the best one?
wow, my gosh. I love the there's a few that I really like. The video game simulation where everybody like you take like a Royal Rumble video game and you create custom wrestlers for everybody in the league, and you let the video game simulation take place. Everybody gets together, watches the game or watches the match, and let the order of that determine your draft order standings. I love that because again, it's all about creating an event where league bonding takes place. So something like that is great. Oh my gosh, I mean, there are so many good ones, but I think that's a really fun one. I've always traditionally used like a bingo ball lottery system as opposed to just a normal randomization, because I think to me, creating an event where you can, get everybody together or have everybody watch online and see it unfold just is a great way to get everybody more connected. So bingo ball lottery is just the easiest to me way to spice things up. But there's a lot of great ones out there for sure.
Okay. All right.
So how about some of the most forgettable or unforgettable last place punishments you've seen? What are your favorite ones out there, or the craziest ones you've seen?
There's actually a good one that's coming up this summer for a friend of mine who works at ESPN, who is, by the way, a brilliant fantasy mind. I was like stunned that he finished last, and then I understood the context. He had been like on this epic run where he had won like 3 straight dynasty championships, And then it was like the bottom fell out all at the same time, right? Like his quarterback was Tom Brady or something, and it was like his wide receiver was Odell Beckham Jr., whatever it was. It was just like a bunch of players who, like, at the very apex of their value, he had them. And then all of a sudden, it all just collapsed. And he was like, I'm just going to not tank, but I'm going to think towards the future. And I believe he has to fly to 3 different cities in 48 hours, but like can't leave the airport. But he has to document it somehow uniquely. So those are kind of fun. I think that the league budget afforded it, right? So it wasn't like he's like going out of pocket and has to like spend $2,000 to fly like on 3 or 4 flights to go into random places and not even actually leaving the airport. So that was a good one right there.
That's great. I'm also getting into revealing 100 different last place punishments. So that's definitely one of the elite ones, one of the most extreme ones. But I've seen that, and I absolutely love that. All right, so we're going to dive into some rapid fire questions. I'll either ask a question or make a comment, and then you just expand, quickly on what you think. First thing that comes to mind.
Okay.
So,
great.
What's your favorite time of the year of the NFL football calendar?
Draft and NFL free agency, for sure.
Nice. Describe the thrill of the NFL free agency season.
It is selling hope. A little bit less so than the draft, but I always tell people during free agency, all 32 teams have hope. You have a lot of cap space, you can sign a lot of players. If you don't have a lot of cap space, oftentimes it's because you have a really good roster and you don't have a lot of work left to do. So it is selling hope.
Love it. So favorite sports movie?
Remember the Titans, for sure.
Good. So describe the build-up leading to the NFL draft.
Ooh, it's the best. It's the most beautiful mystery that is simultaneously just basically Commissioner Goodell up there announcing players' names, right? I think Rich Eisen recently said that like, it wasn't part of my take. He just said, hey, it's like, we're just going up there announcing the names. Like, this could be done over email. This could be done electronically so easily, and yet we make this an amazing event. But I absolutely love it because I said that, free agency is about selling hope, but the draft really is, right? I mean, every team for 3 days feels like they've got something going for them, right? The teams at the top, the Chiefs, we just need one missing piece. We're going to draft this defensive end, Felix Anzuzike-Uzama from Kansas State. Conversely, the Cardinals are like, hey, we're not going to be very good this year, but we might have 2 top 5 picks next year. Everybody has hope during draft weekend.
Love it. Favorite activities when you're off the clock?
Golf, but I stink. I'm really bad. But that by the way, that excludes like the usual, like nothing better than hanging out with my family. Like my daughter is the everything in our life, and we love having playtime with her.
I love it. Describe the excitement of breaking NFL news.
Ooh, there are 2 types. There's news that you get when it's like it's coming to you fast, and you got to get it out as make sure it's accurate and get it out right away. That is one type of news. I think there's a different thrill when it's something that you're working on, and you really have to nail it, and it might take you a couple days, but once you get it and it's going to hit, that's almost more gratifying because if it takes you a couple days to get it, it feels like almost a bit more exclusive, if that makes sense, right? It's like, I've been working on this, right? Like there is layers to the effort. Sometimes you just get news and it's like, hey, something's happening. And that if you don't get it out within a minute or 2, there's probably somebody else who's not too far behind.
Makes sense. What has the support of your family meant to you during your pursuit of your career goals?
Everything, really. I mean, I say this to my wife often, is that she made so many sacrifices for us, and we don't live far from where we're originally from, just a couple of hours. But when we moved down to Connecticut, the reality was that other than my ESPN friends, I didn't know a whole lot of people in this area. And I get it. There are a lot of challenges that go along to building a family and building a life, but we had such a comfort zone in where we were. And it was a leap of faith for both of us, but more so her than I. And I knew that, even if I didn't meet a ton of people outside of work, I always had people at work that I could kind of consider my friends, right? And my wife, who was still working remotely at the time, she wasn't going to have anybody other than herself and the dog. We moved down here before we had any kids. So it is, it might be simple. Maybe it's common, maybe it's not. But to have a spouse who is so ardently behind you unlocks so much. And I know my career is not at all what it is today if not for her unwavering support. I mean that sincerely. I could probably I really, like, of all the things we've talked about, this would be the thing that I could probably do for the entire show, because she is the rock of our family, and there's no two ways about that.
That's wonderful, absolutely wonderful. So, what's been your most difficult challenge over the years?
There's a lot daily. I would say that probably, I don't know if it's the most difficult challenge. It's probably the most relevant right now. Is as the media landscape is evolving, it's understanding how to leverage the various things that are in play. When I started, I was blogging on Tumblr, right? Tumblr, does Tumblr still exist anymore? I don't even know if that is an active platform or not. But it was pretty straightforward. You blogged or you wrote for a website, right? It was now it's like, all right, I've got information. You break the news on Twitter. That seems to be where you break the news. Okay, well then let's react to DeAndre Hopkins getting released. Do I go to TikTok? Do I go to Instagram? Do I go to Twitter? Do I post the same video to all three? Do I have to comment on it? Do I not comment on it? Do I save it for the show? There's so many different ways now you can comment on things that I just feel like understanding and maximizing the various tools we have is a challenge. And there's the fear of doing it wrong balanced against the adrenaline of doing it right.
Wow, yeah, it's definitely an evolving landscape for sure.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
What have you learned the most about yourself over the last 5 years?
That's a good question. I don't know that I have an obvious answer. Probably, I thought when I got started that it was a reps business, in the sense that it takes time to get better, and you just get better. You reach a certain point though, and you just you are what you are. And I've realized now that every single rep that I get is impactful and valuable. That you never stop improving. And not that I expect it to ever stop improving, but the growth is still exponential no matter what stage of your career you're at. And I probably thought that maybe the pace slowed down a little bit at some point.
That's good. That's good. Name 3 people or more that have had a massive impact on you during your professional journey.
Oh man, there are so many. I'll do an ESPN special. I mean, gosh, I could just do a million of them, right? But a lot of them I've already mentioned. Matthew Stefania, Daniel Mike for the podcast. Man, there are so many. Shefty, Seth Markman on the NFL Insider side. Mike Reese has been an incredible mentor to me on the reporting side. I mean, they're really on the NFL Live side, which I'm a big part of now. The entire family has been incredible to me. Laura, Swagoo, RC, Dan, Nina, Key, the producer Scott. I really not that I'll ever win any award of prestige, but if I did, it would be that would be where I'd bring the whole list and just say thank you and just start rating names. But yeah, no, I think that maybe that's something that I've learned recently, is that I work in the business of sports, but I really work in the business of people. And without them, you're really nothing in this industry.
That's fantastic. Do you have any advice for people aspiring to get more involved in the fantasy football industry?
2 things. One, authenticity. It will always rule. Try to be yourself as best you can. 2, just don't stop going, because the easiest way to have people no longer believe in you is to no longer believe in yourself.
That's great. That's great. So what can people expect from you, Field Yates, during the 2023 season? Where are you going to be?
Yeah, I'll be on the Fantasy Focus again. We can't wait. NFL Live, the usual poopery of shows. And I really do think we have our best year ever ahead on Fantasy Focus. And maybe I'll bring some more dad wisdom with 2 children in my home by that point. So can't wait for that, and can't wait for the year ahead.
I love it. I love it. Now, is there anything we haven't covered that you'd like to say before we close things out?
think we've probably done it. This has been a good comprehensive hour.
Absolutely. No, I would agree for sure. Thank you so much, Field. It has been such a pleasure to have you on the podcast. You are incredible in so many ways, and you've impacted me tremendously. And I just can't wait to see, where your career continues to go.
Doc, thank you so much. And right back to you. I look forward to being on again at some point down the line.
Sounds great. I'll definitely make sure that happens.
Thank you for listening to the Fantasy Football Unlimited podcast. Until next time, be sure to follow and subscribe to all of FFU's social media accounts for daily content.